fascism, which was particularly keen on merging the corporate elitists with the political system. So you gradually brought the two together. But the other thing which leads us to believe that Gramsci is important is that we've seen Gramsci's name being used by Demos, and we also know that Gramsci was one of the proponents of destroying Western society by gradually attacking and destroying the key pillars of that society. So you would undermine the establishment figures and institutions, you would attack the police, you would ridicule the politicians, and you would remove any sense of history and the sense of national culture from a particular country. So Gramsci was one of the people that started to advocate the destruction of Western democracies by a slow, creeping method instead of the guns and bullets that we've seen over the years.
Mm.
And I can say to you that I am absolutely sure, and if I'm allowed to say, using my military training and experience, I'm absolutely sure that what we're witnessing in Britain today is the destruction of the country from the inside. I have no doubt of this.
Hmm. And who do you think would be, in that sense, interested in doing this? Is this a way for them to break down the ideology and also the sense of nationalism that many English people in Britain have today in regards to the agenda to merge better, I guess, from their point of view, into the EU? Or why do you think they're doing it?
Well, the EU is certainly a key part of it. I think we'll have to be quite focused in how we deal with things a step at a time, because there's a lot of interconnecting pieces here.
Mm.
We know that Common Purpose is pro-European Union, because if we look at all the courses they run, we look at their promotional material, we look at who they invite to do talks and talk to graduates, which are their trainees. There is a wealth of material showing that they are pushing people towards the European Union. The European Union is a wonderful idea. The breaking down of national borders is wonderful. The mixing of people across borders is wonderful. And particularly in their material for children, they're putting in children's minds the idea that it doesn't really matter where you live, because as long as you're within the European Union, everybody is a European. Now, some of the listeners may be thinking to themselves, well, this is quite an innocent idea, but I'm going to say you have to start to put this ideology in with other things that we're seeing.
Yeah.
The next part of it is that in the Common Purpose training, there is a great push for diversity, for mixing people of different cultures and backgrounds. And again, when you look at this, first of all, this seems a good idea. All of us would say we want people to get on harmoniously. But what Julia Middleton points at, and indeed she says this in her book, Beyond Authority, is that after people have done the Common Purpose training with its heavy base of diversity training, people don't want to work in homogenous groups. They don't want to stay working in the same groups that they were working in before. They want to move out beyond that. And so what Common Purpose is starting to do is to get people to leave the boundaries of their own establishments and start to move across boundaries. And where this becomes dangerous is if you have somebody who's a senior figure within an organization, let's say you have a police officer, if you start to promote that person and encourage them to work with, say, a member of the local public services or the local city authority, have to start to say, well, where does responsibility and accountability, where does that start and end? If the police officer is working within his own organisation, he's got well-defined limits of responsibility, and therefore he can be fully accountable. But when the police officer starts to work with a group of other public officials within partnerships, and particularly where meetings are held behind closed doors, then all of a sudden it's not easy to see where his responsibility lies, and perhaps more importantly, the lines of accountability start to become blurred. So Common Purpose has been gently building up networks of trained people, which are in all sectors of society, but particularly the public sector. And these people are working under the surface in a networking arrangement to gently implement their new political agenda. So it's very slow, it's very gentle, but it's hidden. So the ordinary person, unless they know what they're looking for, has absolutely no idea that a totally new political agenda is being pushed into the system, into society.
Very interesting. And I want to talk a little bit more and a little bit while here about this training and the way that they're training certain leaders who seem to groom even people from a young age and take them into the organization to become future leaders and so forth. But before we do that, Brian, tell us more about the international bankers. You mentioned Julia Middleton's love for international bankers. Tell us more about that.
Well, I think actually it'd be quite useful. I've got in front of me on my desk Julia Middleton's book, which is called Beyond Authority, Leadership in a Changing World. And in it there are a number of quotes, and also the work gives you an insight into Julia Middleton's mind, which is fascinating. But she quotes banks a lot, and if I look at this one section in front of me, she's saying that Hans Reckers is a board member of Deutsche Bundesbank, and he introduced me to this East German expression. And the useful expression she's talking about is useful idiot. So Julia Middleton is proudly boasting that a German banker is using a term useful idiot, and she's so impressed with this term that she takes up on it in the book, that there are people out there, they're just idiots, but we can use them. And in the same section of this book, which I find quite extraordinary, she starts to quote about von Papen and Hitler. So she's talking about in the 1930s. I'll just read you this. In the 1930s, for example, von Papen was Hitler's vice-chancellor in the Weimar Republic. Apparently, even on his deathbed, he was convinced that he'd been right to stay in post. He thought he could control Hitler and steer Germany through the chaos of the early 1930s. I suspect that history judges him differently. Now, we've got a section on Hitler. We're talking East German bankers, and we are using the fact that some members of the community don't really understand what's happening, but they can be used as useful idiots. Now, if we go to the other end of the scale, Julia Middleton is suddenly talking about expert idiots. And she said this is another useful German expression and a variant on the useful idiot. These are leaders who know a huge amount about a small, sometimes tiny core. So I'm giving you two things in one go, but if we go through the book, which is Julia Middleton's personal work, we are seeing constant references to banks and elitist people within the European Commission or within major companies, and certainly within the financial institutions. In some of the common purpose literature, until fairly recently, they were boasting about how they've been using people from Lehman Brothers to come and educate school children. Now, having watched the total collapse and chaos and fraud and corruption within the international banking scene, I hardly think people from Lehman Brothers are good examples for young children in school. But Julia Middleton apparently thinks so.
How about that? It's just incredible. And again, go ahead.
Well, if I just pull out a couple of other bits in the book,
yeah,
she clearly doesn't like the British. I find this fascinating. She's very scathing about the British. We're warlike. We're very cold, and she criticises us for the fact that we apparently take tinned foods on holiday with us. Now, I've spent quite a bit of time abroad, and I've lived in Holland for 2 years, and I've thoroughly enjoyed all of that, and I've seen a lot of other British people abroad, and I'm intrigued that Julia Middleton picks up what she thinks are national attributes from obviously one or two people who we wouldn't consider to be the norm. She's quite scathing about white males, and you get the impression that this lady is quite bitter about existing society, and I think this helps to show that she's actually working to help create a new society.
And I definitely want to talk more about that later on as well, what that new society is going to look like, if they're actually are going to be able to plan out their plans that they have. But let's go back a little bit, Brian, and talk about this training or indoctrination, almost we can call it. I mean, you've alluded to that as well, that you've raised this question: what type of training do they actually go through? Is it brainwashing? I know that in one of your presentations you talked about different people who have approached you and talked about the way that they didn't like the way they were feeling afterwards when they've done some of these seminars or joined some of these training programs and so forth. Is there mind control in one way going on here, or what? How do you think that they're doing this? How are they training and educating people?
Right. Well, I think I'll say first of all that in the beginning we didn't really understand what we were looking at. What we had experienced was a group of people who were connected by the fact that they were common purpose members who were working against us. So I'm talking here about our little project. But we were able to see that people had communicated to our disadvantage, that emails had been sent to our disadvantage. So you got the picture of people who were working against you. And we knew that Common Purpose was basically running these training courses. The main course at that stage was called the Matrix, which is an interesting name.
Very interesting.
And for somebody to do the Matrix course, they would go away to perhaps a small hotel or a small discreet venue with overnight accommodation, and they would do a 48-hour slot with Common Purpose, and then following that they would do 1 day a month for a year. Now the first thing that we learnt was that you couldn't just go and do the course. The way it worked was